Turn to your neighbor, tell them something that you've been in charge of before. Maybe none of you have ever really been the boss of anything, but you like programmed Siri to like answer you as boss, right? Anybody change what Siri addresses you as? Like mine, I'll just be real honest. I'm not necessarily real proud of it, but part of me is really proud of it. I have Siri call me awesome pants, and it just makes me feel better about myself, raises my self-esteem a little bit. But whether you are or aren't, whether you are or you aren't a boss of anything, the reality is we all have had bosses, right? Either at work or at home, at school, on the team, in the practice. You've had bosses over you, and maybe we call those bosses something else, but the reality is they're all people that are over us, and we have to answer to them. And the reality of the situation is that a lot of times you and I don't want to be told what to do by those people, right? There's a lot of times where you and I would just rather we be the boss. So a lot of times we buy into the lie of thinking that when we get older, when we become adults, that like we won't have to deal with this the same way. But the reality is, like, I'm done being a teenager because I want to be my own boss, right? How many of you have ever thought that before? Like, I'm ready to get out of high school so I can be in charge of my fate. I can be my own boss, right? Just a heads up, you're going to have more bosses when you get out of high school. They're just going to look different. And so the honest truth is all of us wish that we were sitting in the boss's chair, right? All of us wish that we were sitting in the boss's chair of our lives with no one telling us what to do. And it's kind of weird because we always have and always will have authority figures in our life, right? But as we get older, that looks a little bit different. And if we're in the principal's office or whatever, sitting in our chair, you've got the principal's desk, or maybe it's your office manager. They've got the desk between you and them, and they've got the real chair, right? You've got the like metal clanky one, and they've got the real comfy chair. And you think, you know what? Sitting from this chair, I can judge every decision that you're making, and I can see everything that you're doing, Mom and Dad. And I know that if I were in your position, I could do it way better. Because let's be honest, you don't know what it's like to be me, and I probably see things on this level that you don't see in that chair. And you'd probably expect me as the good, youth pastor to tell you, you're wrong, and those people always know best. But I know you're smarter than that, and I know that, sometimes you do know better than those people. It happens. But the reality is, whether you do know better or not, you're not in that chair, so you don't get to make the call. We all struggle with this idea that sometimes we think like we could do the job better if we were sitting in this chair. How many of you have thought that before? Is it just me? Like, anybody ever thought like, myself better than my mom knows me? She doesn't know what it's like to live as a teenage girl in 2018, right? Come on, let's be honest. You guys have thought that. The reality is, you're not sitting in this chair. As much as you'd like to, you're not. And so we tend to go to one of three options when we disagree with the authority figures that are in our lives, right? First off, either we challenge that authority, right? We stand up to that authority and loudly tell them, or make it known to them that I don't think you know what you're doing, and I think that was the wrong decision. And you've seen this happen because you've either seen like other people do that, or you've maybe done it yourself, and you've spat it off. You challenge that authority, okay? Or sometimes we just ignore it altogether. Maybe we're sitting in this chair, and we think, you know what? I'll just nod my head and smile, and as soon as they turn their back, I'm just going to continue doing what I was doing, right? Because I know better. And you just decide, silently fly under the radar, right? But the third way is to, actually rebel against that authority, which is not only to challenge it, not only to ignore it, but to just outright do the opposite. Like, they tell you to sit down and you stand up. They tell you to stand up and you sit down, right? You just do the opposite of whatever that person tells you to do because you don't like them, and you're going to just more with the rules that maybe your parents have in the house or something like that. And maybe it's something that the teacher says in class not to do when it comes to some fly under the radar and do it your own way. Or you'll outright say, no, I'm going to do it my own way. And whatever it is, you guys are probably thinking of something or a circumstance in your life that you have done that or that you've wanted to do that. How many of you are like the type that, like, if I want to do it, I'm going to do it? And how many of you are the type that, like, I want to do it, but I'm too scared to tell them to their face, so I'll just vent to my friend? Yeah, that was me, because I was scared of authority. And so I would smile and nod, then go to my friends and be like, oh, they're so stupid, if they don't even know what it's like to live my life, right? And just you like mouth off to yourself and like kind of mumble under your breath. And then like with my parents, I would mouth off to my mom's face, mostly when my dad was gone, and then he'd get back and I'd get in trouble. And if my dad was there, it was like a yes, sir, like I will never, ever do something wrong ever again kind of thing. But the truth is, we all have to face this. We all have to try to figure out what it's supposed to look like for us to live life in a God-honoring way under the authority figures that God has placed into our lives, whether or not we know better or not. There's a lot of times that we are sitting in this chair and we don't have the luxury of making the decisions or carrying the weight of what it's like to sit in this chair. And so the author of Hebrews, actually, interesting fact, we don't know who the author of Hebrews is. Like, it's the only book in the New Testament that we just really, we guess. We don't know who the author could be. But we do know who the author was writing to. And the author was writing to the Jews, the Israelites. And he's writing at a time that's after Jesus has already come. So the Jews grew up with what we would call the Old Testament and learned what they were supposed to do through that. And, they listened to their rabbis. They did all that kind of stuff. And there were like over 600 laws and commands they were supposed to follow. And some of them were obscure. Some of them made sense. And then Jesus came and he said, no, just I taught you that. I fulfilled it, but I've taught you that so that you can understand and see the bigger picture of like what I'm going towards. Like, you don't literally have to wear, like, there was a law that you couldn't wear a type of clothing that had more than one type of stitch in it. Like two different types of fabric, you weren't allowed to do it. Like some of us have like cotton or polyester like combined into like they can't do that. So in the Old Testament world. But Jesus came, and he didn't physically say this that I know, but this is the heart of what he was saying. He was saying, is that my kid? That kid's loud. Okay, just hear baby yelling in the hallway. But, back then, the law was that they couldn't wear any kind of clothing with two different types of fabric in it. And it wasn't just because, so two-stitch clothing. Jesus is saying, like that law was good because what I wanted you to learn is that you can't live your life in two different ways. You can't live your life in such a way that you pledge your allegiance to me as God, but then live your own life as if I don't exist. But then Jesus came, he's like, let me make this simple for you. I made that law for you so you can understand the big picture idea that following me, if you're going to follow me, then you don't get to just choose what you want and also try to follow me. You have to submit your life to me and lay down your life and take up your cross, just like I did. Maybe it's not literally to the death, but it's denying yourself and your own desires. And so the author of Hebrews is writing to these Jews who grew up with the Old Testament, and he's trying to teach them what life is supposed to look like now post-resurrection, after Jesus has come and risen from the dead. And here's what he says in chapter 13. He says, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority. Now, if we just stop right there, because if you're like me, then I have a lot of buts that should follow that. Like, but you don't know this person, or but you don't know how they live when they're off the job, or you don't know what they look like when they're not in church, right? And we have these buts that we like to add to that sentence. Submit to authority, and he doesn't have a but there. I mean, I'm sure the writer had a but he not in his. Anyway, so the author of Hebrews is writing, and he's saying, have confidence in your leaders. Now, what you have to understand is, who was their leaders at the time? Who was the government of that time? It was Rome. Did Rome like Christians? No. Did Rome unfairly tax the Christians and or hunt them down and try to kill them at times because they didn't like them, or rip them away from their families and throw them in jail? See, Rome persecuted them, and yet the author of Hebrews is saying, I know it's rough, but you have to submit to them, because we're not going to change the world by just rebelling and fighting back. We fight back, but just not with the weapons of this world. So you got to submit. When they see your obedience, because some of their own citizens don't even obey the way that you do. It's going to turn some heads, and they're not just going to notice you, they're going to notice Jesus. And they're going to put some stock into what you actually believe. And so he's saying, submit to those who are in authority over you. The challenge to us in any situation and dealing with authority is to first accept the relationship that we're in. The relationship where they are the boss and you are not. Where they're sitting in this chair and you're sitting in this chair. What he's saying is you have to recognize, even if you're not confident that they know what they're doing, or even if you know that they don't know what they're doing, you can choose to believe that people have good intentions and that they're just trying to carry out the responsibility that's been given to them. So then he continues on, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, for they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. In other words, your boss is not the top of the food chain. Your boss has a boss who has a boss, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, coaches and teachers have to answer to the principal. The principal answers to the parents, the school board, and the superintendent. Managers have to answer to their bosses, the owners. Parents have to answer to their leaders, their families, and even the government. And you know what? Even the government has to answer to somebody. Nobody is their own authority. Even the president of the United States has people he has to report to and get approval through. And so there's the checks and balances system, even with that. And even above that, everybody's got to answer to God. All authority must give account to somebody. And ultimately, your authority figures are responsible for giving an account to God for whatever they do. So where does that leave us? To summarize, your authorities have an authority. Ultimately, that boss is God, and God is paying attention to what they do and don't do. God sees it. He sees what is in the hearts of all those who are in authority. He sees their interests. He sees their motives. Fixing the problems with your authority figures is God's job, not yours. So it's not your job to sit here and tell this person what to do. That's ultimately their authority's job. That's ultimately God's job, not yours. But it can be real easy, especially if you're like me and you're stubborn and you think you know everything, to sit here and tell this person you don't know what you're doing and try to interject yourself in the situation. But the reality is that if we all have to answer to God, then here, let's just actually check out this next verse. He says, do this so that the authorities, work will be a joy, not a burden. For that it would be of no benefit to you if you were, in other words, if you were rebellious. Like that would be of no benefit to you. You're not like proving your point by just rebelling against authority. In fact, it's going to make it more difficult on you. So like, for instance, how many of you guys, you have like a phone rule at your house or something where you've got to like plug it in out in your parents' room or out at the table when you go to bed at night? How many of you have a rule you're not allowed to take your phone to bed with you? Okay? So let's just, in this hypothetical situation, let's say parents make a rule that you have to turn the phone in by 10 o'clock at night. And that's for the purpose of you finishing your homework, getting to bed at a decent hour, not staying up late on your phone, that kind of stuff. But you decide, sitting in this chair, you know what? I know that's a rule, and I know why that rule is there, but I can handle it. And so you hold on to your phone till like 10:30, 11. And then you try to like sneak out and like plug it in out in the kitchen at a later time. Well, if your parents see it, then there's going to be consequences, right? So let's just say that they see it and they take the phone away for a couple of days. Or if it happens multiple times, they'll probably take the phone away for good or for like a month, a long period of time. So in your rebellion to prove how responsible you are, have you gained more freedoms or lost freedoms? You get what I'm saying, right? So what he's saying to the people is that if you rebel to try to prove your point, you won't get anywhere. But if you submit, actually, if you obey the 10 o'clock rule over a long period of time, and then you ask for an extension, do you think your parents are going to have a little more trust in you to say, well, you've been faithful with the 10 o'clock rule, I'll extend it to 11 on a permanent basis? Do you think they'd be more likely to say that if you've submitted to the 10 o'clock rule? See, and that's what he's saying. That's how all life works. If you want to handle your bosses like a boss, then you accept them and their authority in your life. And ultimately, that will gain you more freedom over time. But we like to sit here too much, I think, and just rebel to try to prove a point that really doesn't benefit anybody. Because what it does is it makes these people bitter towards you, and it continues a cycle of bitterness towards them. and then neither of you get anywhere. And that's not a fun place and fun relationship to be with anyone. Some of you have been in this kind of cycle with authority figures in your life, and you haven't really gotten anywhere. So what I want to do is challenge your view on authority this week. Life is better when you honor the boss. That's just a life truth. That's not necessarily a Christian truth, that's a life truth. But Christian leaders have gone out of their way to make sure that we know that there is value to that. And that's why God says that you should honor those in authority over you, not just so that you can make their life easier, because it really makes your life easier. And if you can't obey the people that are in your life that are over you, that you can see and talk with, how are you supposed to obey a God that you can't see? So I think the bigger picture lesson here that God wants us to learn is that if we want to submit to Him ultimately, we've got to prove that we can submit to the people He's put over us in our lives. So how do we honor our bosses? First, it's important to know what honor means. Honor doesn't necessarily mean agree with, but it does mean to respect. I want you to kind of think through your life, the people that are in authority over you, and think about the ones that you like, and what are the things that you like about them. Think about the ones you don't like, and think about what are the things you don't like about them. Just think through that for a second. And a couple ways that you can honor them this next week and moving forward is you can say something. Pay attention to the way that you speak to them. If they're easy to follow, encourage them and say, hey, I love working under you or following your leadership for this reason or whatever. Say something to them. Or if there's somebody that you don't necessarily agree with, then when they ask you to do something, put a smile on that face and say, yes, sir, and not in a sarcastic way, because they'll see that too. Say something doesn't necessarily mean verbally, because your rolling eyes or whatever can say something too, but say something positive. If they're difficult to follow, commit to still speaking in a way that shows respect. And then the second thing you can do is do something. Attitude is everything. Do whatever they ask you to do, because it just makes your life so much easier, and it actually makes you a better witness to that person. So as we finish up here, I want you to think through those authority figures in your life. I want you to think through the ones that you like, the ones that you don't like, and think through why that is, what those reasons are that you have for liking or disliking them. Maybe you've thought about this already because you're so excited to get in this seat, but think about the ways, the leadership qualities that you want to take and put into your life whenever you are in a position like them. And then the ones you don't like, take note of that too, because you want to ultimately be a person that shows honor to God by the way that you honor others, because you want your life to point to Jesus, because your life is so much bigger than just you. And I think that's the real treat that we have as Christians, is we get to make our lives more than just about finding some purpose for ourselves. We get to be on the side of the creator of the universe to show people what it's like to have hope in a world that seems to steal so much.